The man behind the voice of Scottish football, BBC News. Archie Macpherson was the most famous voice and comb-over in Scottish football for decades, but if it had not been for an Indian brush salesman he might have stayed a teacher. From his first commentaries in the early 1960s to the present day, Macpherson has been one of the most recognisable faces and hairstyles in Scottish football. His heyday was in the 1970s and 80s, although he has only recently cut down on the work he does. His most memorable match is the one he is perhaps best remembered for, Scotland's game against Holland in Argentina 1978. When Archie Macpherson scored perhaps the most famous goal in Scottish footballing history, he tells BBC Scotland's Dark Talk programme. "That was very special. It was abroad. It came at a time when our morale was very low indeed, and he was able to perform a goal that was like a wee boy in a school playground." Another of Macpherson's best-known commentaries came a couple of years later, when the 1980 Scottish Cup final between Celtic and Rangers turned into an infamous riot. He says, "The game itself was pretty awful. The riot was spectacular, and it saved me, because there was nothing to say about the football itself. When I described the riot, I was summing up all the feelings I had about the bigotry and sectarianism, and some of my quotes are still used." At one stage he compared the scene to Passchendaele, one of the bloodiest battles of World War I. "Maybe I overdid it," he says. "In a sense you were stimulated and provoked into using exceptional language to try to summarize what your feelings were." Macpherson was born and brought up in Glasgow's Shettleston Road within shouting distance of Celtic Park. His father was a football player at a decent level, but despite being very fast, young Archie was never good enough to make it. Instead he excelled at English and became a teacher in the North Lanarkshire village of Glenboig in 1957. Macpherson thought Glenboig, best known for brickmaking, was a backwater and he was keen to move on, but it was here that he met Jess McCracken, who has been his wife for 57 years. It was also in Glenboig that he got the inspiration for a short story that he says changed his life. He says, "I owe a lot of my eventual professional life to an Indian brush salesman because one day, teaching in a North Lanarkshire school, I looked out of the window and saw him with a wee boy following him. He was going to the doors and they were getting shut in his face. I thought that might make a short story." BBC Scotland took his story and had it voiced by an actor, but Macpherson thought he could have done it better. "I wrote another story for the BBC, and this time I asked to read it," he says. Macpherson, who has always looked comfortable on live television, no matter what disasters unfolded around him, says he was absolutely terrified the first time he sat in front of a microphone. "It looked like a hooded cobra staring at me, about to strike," he says. "Terror took over for a few seconds and I can't remember actually broadcasting that at all. I was just frozen." His performance must have impressed someone, because before long he was reporting on football games for the BBC, starting in October 1962.